What's going on, everybody? My name is Ryan Thomas. You're tuning into the Thomas Take Sports Podcast live on YouTube. And it's no secret, I'm a mixed martial arts sports writer, whatever you want to, MMA journalist for MyFantasySportsTalk.com. I got a lot of awesome MMA articles coming out in regards to many, many topics, some of which haven't taken place yet. Once those take place and we know who wins and who loses, you'll get a lot of articles coming from yours truly on MyFantasySportsTalk.com. So, that being said, I tuned in today I tuned into a very, very good episode of the Joe Rogan Experience, Joe Rogan's podcast, and I was actually outside of Valvoline. I was getting my oil changed. I was about to have my car lifted on the lift to have my tires rotated. And I'm on my phone and I'm on YouTube of course. And I see JRE is live MMA show 28 with George St.Pierre. I'm like, I got to stop what I'm doing. GSP has been my favorite fighter for the last 15 years. GSP is the main reason why I got into the sport in terms of watching it, in terms of writing about it. Without GSP, none of it would have been possible. And I really think that. I think that for me, I think that for a lot of other fans, I think that for a lot of other fighters, without George St. Pierre being the first truly great athlete in the sport of MMA, I really think it helped evolve MMA into new levels, to new heights that we never thought were possible. Also, without GSP's loss to Matt Serra, where he lost that fight by knockout, vicious knockout, upset loss. Without that, wouldn't have had, that much of a, that was the first real upset loss in MMA for a fighter. And his comeback trail put him back on the map. Him redeeming himself was a massive, massive story in the UFC and in mixed martial arts at the time that brought new eyes to the sport post the Liddell, Ortiz, Couture era. GSP was that next guy. Matt Hughes I could throw in there as well in that era with Liddell and Couture and Ortiz. GSP was that next level guy. He was that Anderson Silva style, that John Jones. All three of those guys really brought a new allure and a new athleticism to the sport that nobody had ever seen yet at those weight classes: welterweight, middleweight, light heavyweight. But I'd say GSP was literally the first to do it in terms of being the first successful athlete to transition from Kyokushin karate, taekwondo to MMA, and really be the first fighter to unite a country, first MMA fighter to unite a country like that with Canada. I would attribute George St. Pierre, his Canadian drawing power to one of the many reasons why the UFC has been able to be the global powerhouse that it has been the last few years. He's had a fantastic career. I've always stated that I think he's the best of all time, and I'm not just saying that from being a number one fan of his. I'm saying that just due to the career that he has actually had. His only two losses, to Matt Hughes and to Matt Serra, were avenged. He beat Matt Hughes twice. He beat Matt Serra in the rematch to reclaim his title, and then went on this epic GSP era title run where he was the champion at welterweight for 6 years. That does not happen often in the sport of MMA. He had one of the longest title runs in UFC history, the most title victories in title bouts in UFC history, I believe, and walked away from the sport for a 4-year span just to return to fight at a weight class that he had never fought at versus Michael Bisping at middleweight, fight the middleweight champion at the time, Michael Bisping, and win that fight in the fashion that he did, dropping Bisping with that left hook and then choking him unconscious. Was truly one of the most memorable moments in my UFC fandom And it was recent. It was in November, but I don't think I'll ever forget that fight. There's few fights that have transcended in the UFC, very few. And GSP owns the majority of them in my fanhood. John Jones and Gustafsson, Anderson versus Chael. GSP's whole career was a mega fight. Each time he won, each time he defended that belt, it brought more pressure, more eyes to his career that he just surpassed time and time and time again. So when I saw that he was on this podcast, which is a podcast that I've followed for many, many years, being the MMA fan that I am, and now that Joe Rogan has decided to take this route with his show and do these MMA shows, specifically MMA, hosting MMA coaches, analysts, fighters, it's great. It was great to see that. And as I'm waiting for my tires to get done rotating, I go off, right off into the sunset, and I'm like, I don't want to unplug my aux cord from my phone and stop listening to this. I'm going to go for a drive. I'm going to run some errands in between, pause it, and then continue to listen to it. Over the course of my day, that's what I did. I ran some errands. I got my protein powder. I got my pre-workout supplements. I got my my lunch, my ultra clean lunch, by the way, and listened to this podcast featuring the best MMA fighter to ever do it, and I don't even think it's close. John Jones tested positive. Conor McGregor has never defended a title. Anderson Silva has failed drug tests multiple times, as has John Jones. GSP brought an era in the sport that allowed fighters that fought clean to fight other fighters clean in the UFC, bringing USADA forward. That was the GSP initiative. Without that, we are still talking about a sport that lets fighters pop for steroids, lets fighters bend the rules. GSP was the guy that really was the white knight of the UFC. And I think that is what makes him the best ever, among many, many other reasons. And first thing I thought on this podcast when I saw that he was on, well, I'll find out whether he's done or not. I'll find out what the career outlook of George St.Pierre is. I'll get a chance to find that out, to hear that from the main source himself, George St.Pierre. And throughout all the podcast, which was very, very interesting, we got to see GSP in a completely new light. We got to hear him talk about his hobbies outside of his fighting career, which I found to be very entertaining. The man that is the greatest MMA fighter ever is one of the nerdiest people on the face of the earth. I think that's pretty damn cool. Talked about being bullied, talked about all the stuff that he experienced as a youth that allowed him to embark on this mixed martial arts journey that became this legacy that I think will be unmatched in UFC history and in MMA history. Along the way, we did learn what his next career path is going to be. That career path is a path that I am so amped up for, because the best fighters are at this division. The best fights for George St.Pierre are at this division. Joe Rogan asked him specifically if he would move down to 155, and George said he is thinking about it. Woo! Sign me up for that. Because if GSP does fight Khabib Nurmagomedov, who is the reigning UFC lightweight champ, if he does fight Khabib, or maybe he fights the winner of Khabib versus Conor, which would be even better, the prospects of that, the biggest fight in UFC history, no doubt about it, biggest fight in MMA history would be McGregor versus GSP. There is no doubting that. It would surpass every pay-per-view ever, maybe even of all time, including boxing, because boxing's audience has kind of migrated to the UFC now with the Mayweather-McGregor fight. Canada, Ireland, you got some real potential there of it being the highest bought pay-per-view ever, in my opinion. See, Manny and Maypac was big. Maymac was big. GSP versus Mac is big. It's really big. GSP versus Habib is really big, but GSP versus McGregor is even bigger, based on name recognition alone. I've just been so enamored with the idea of this, that he could literally become the first fighter ever in UFC history to win 3 titles in 3 different weight classes, cementing his legacy, as it already is, in my opinion, as the best to ever do it. But you defend the welterweight title for all those years. You take a side step and you go your own way. You wait till the sport gets clean. You come back. You fight Michael Bisping. You finish Michael Bisping. And then you come back again and fight Habib, go from 185 to 155, fight the winner of Habib versus Conor. If that fight happens first, I don't know. Fight for the title. If he fights for the title, it's huge. It's huge, huge story. Would he be cutting in line with some of the contenders at the division? You bet. But he's George St.Pierre. He's the Wayne Gretzky of MMA. It is what it is. That's politics, people. Conor McGregor cut the line, and he didn't even defend a title yet. GSP better damn well be allowed to cut the line. He defended his title for years, over half a decade. So all that, oh, he's going to cut the line, and the UFC is going to help him cut the line. Shut up, because he deserves to cut the line. He earned the right to cut the line. Rather than talking, he talked the talk, and he walked the walk, defending that strap for over half of a decade. Look at all the champions that have come and gone in the sport. Look at the UFC bantamweight division, women's bantamweight division. After Ronda lost her title, that title was passed around like a candy bar afterwards. Look at the middleweight division with Rockhold, with Silva, Weidman, Rockhold, Bisping, and GSP. That title got passed around too. Should have actually been passed around once more. I thought Dan Henderson beat Michael Bisping in the rematch. But heavyweight has had some consistency with Stipe. Men's bantamweight division has had some title changes. You go from Dillashaw to Cruz to Garbrandt, back to Dillashaw. We'll find out if that changes again. Realistically, the career outcome has been, since this middleweight title victory versus Michael Bisping, the career outcome that GSP has wanted since his bout with this stomach disorder was to move down to 155 pounds, cash a big check, get another title, and call it a day. 3-weight world champion. Elite company, standing alone, is the best of all time. I'm Ryan Thomas. It was the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. Take care, everybody.